Hello, this is Ben119 and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to carry on with my Twilight Princess HD dungeon design series. So we are up to dungeon number 7, which is the City in the Sky. And this is my favourite dungeon in Twilight Princess and one of my favourite dungeons of all time. And the reason why is because of the actual dungeon, the layout itself, and the dungeon item is my favourite item in the game and one of my favourite items in the series. So we start off in this area here because we get launched into the dungeon by a cannon, and there is like a pool of water. It's a bit weird, I don't really understand why there's a pool of water up here. Maybe they built it for the cannons so people get launched up and they land safely in the water, even though that wouldn't really work in real life. So under the water here we got two chests. I guess they're fairly hidden, but you just need to go underwater with your iron boots and get them. There's just rupees, it's optional stuff. It would have been cool if they put a key under there or something, that would have been quite nice. So just before we head into the actual dungeon itself, there is an actual shop off to the right. It's a bit weird why there's a shop, because I've never really seen this before. There's not really been a shop like in a dungeon. But basically there's an Uku running the shop, and if we go over to the right and we talk to this Uku, we can actually get him. So you know how there's an Uku you need to find in each dungeon, and he works as a dungeon item, kind of, how you can warp back and two between things when you turn the game off. Basically this is where he is. He's in the shop. He's not like hidden in the dungeon. I know in Temple of Time, I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but he was just at the start of the dungeon. They got a bit lazy with the Ukus because at the start of the game they used to hide them really well in dungeons and you had to find them, but in the later dungeons you end up just being given them. Like, it's really strange to me. So let's actually head into the dungeon. So the main items you're going to want to need in this dungeon is the claw shot and the iron boots. Especially the claw shot, like, because there's so many opportunities to use the claw shot. I know there has been opportunities before in dungeons, but in this dungeon especially. So right there's a switch up there, and if you try using your bow, it won't usually hit because the wind is too strong and it'll blow away the arrows. So you need to use the claw shot. This is the City in the Sky. I'll quickly talk about it. So I really like this dungeon. I'll talk about the layout more in a minute, but as you can see it's a really nice looking dungeon. But my problem with it is it's just really strange looking, but it doesn't take away from the fact that the dungeon's amazingly designed. But yeah, I was talking about the items and how they're used. So the iron boots are going to be used a lot because of wind, and in most of the outside rooms in this dungeon there's usually wind blowing, and if you don't wear your iron boots you usually get blown away and you fall off. So you need to wear the iron boots to stay still, because if you don't, you'll just fall off and die. So iron boots are quite helpful there. There's also a few puzzles where you may need the iron boots later on, so you'll need them. The spinner is used a few times in this dungeon, which is pretty cool. Boomerang's used, and the claw shot is used, and the dungeon item, which I'm not going to spoil. So right here we're using Ukus, and it's quite weird because we never had to use Ukus in this way before. Oh, we've just had them as a dungeon item, but now we can actually use them to glide. It's really strange. They're really weird looking creatures. So this is kind of the main room in this dungeon. So you can go left, right and forward. Now, I'm not going to go forward because we can't go forward yet because it's blocked by something. So instead I'm going to go left. But the door on the left is inaccessible as well because we need another item to get to it. So I'm going to go out the window because you're able to get out of this window. So we can actually use our spinner here, and we're actually able to access something on the left side of the dungeon now. So if you go inside of the spinner slot and you mash the spinner button, it'll create a bridge, as you can see over there. I really like this, it's a really cool idea. And I wish like the spinner was used more in this case, like for spinner tracks as well, because I don't think there's enough spinner tracks in this game. I don't think there's enough things for the spinner to use, but I think the spinner's an amazing item. So with this dungeon layout, I was going to talk about the layout. So there is like a big section of the dungeon that's on the left, there's a big section on the right, and there's a big section in the middle. And the dungeon has actually got a lot of floors. There's 3 basement floors and there's 5 regular floors, so it is one of the biggest dungeons, and I think this is actually the longest dungeon. I think when I recorded this dungeon it took me almost an hour to do it, which is way longer than like the second longest. I think the final dungeon could be quite long as well. I've not recorded that one yet. So we're just going to head into this door here, and as you can see there's a claw shot target on the ceiling. So we're going to get it, and we're going to go into this chest here. And it's quite important you get this chest because it's a key, and we're going to need this key for a door, which is on the other side of the dungeon. So we're going to head back now. Now you can claw shot onto that stuff there. And something that you may need to know is when you claw shot onto vines, you're actually not able to re-claw shot. So say if you're hanging onto vines, you can't re-claw shot, which is like a thing. And I know when you claw shot onto vines, you instantly grab the vines, but I know when you claw shot onto other things, you end up just sticking to them until you let go. With vines, you can like climb around. So I put my iron boots on there so they don't fall off. Now you can take them off because it is a bit of a pain wearing them all the time because of how slow you go. So when the wind isn't blowing, just time it, and that's the best way of going about it. So there's a little cutscene here, and this kind of reminds me of the first dungeon, because there's an important bridge here that leads to an important section of the dungeon, and then the boss of the dungeon destroys it. So that dragon there, I know it's a bit of a spoiler, but he is the main boss of the dungeon. He's not a mini boss, and he is one of the best bosses in the game and the series as well. So that bridge has been destroyed, so we're not able to get back to that side of the dungeon until way later on. So we're gonna have to find another way around, which should be interesting. But now we got a key, we can head to the door on the right, because I didn't go in the door on the right first because you need a key to progress. You can get in there now, but you kind of need a key, you'll see what I mean. So you can actually claw shot onto these vines from here. It's just that you can't really get to the door from where I am now. You can get back though. But you can get to this door just fine because there's just platforms. This dungeon is really weird, and this dungeon will make a lot more sense once you do get the dungeon item. It's just for now it doesn't really make much sense because you can access a lot of stuff still, but there's a lot of things in this dungeon that seem really weird and out of place. Like certain claw shot targets, they're out of place. There's certain sections that just look impossible to traverse at the moment, but you'll understand it later on. So on this side here, I kind of like how they use the same puzzle. In a way, you could say it's a bit lazy how they use the exact same kind of thing to make another bridge appear. But at the same time, I do like it when dungeons have like a symmetrical element to them. It is quite interesting to me. So it's important you go to the left, because if you'd done this one first, you would have realised you wasted your time because there's a locked door over here. Now these birds can be really annoying because they just are. Like, they end up flying around and they can sometimes knock you off in places in the dungeon, so you gotta be careful. So there we go, we can unlock the locked door. So let's go through here. Something I do find a bit weird in this dungeon, I do understand why they have it though, is that every time you go into an outside area and then you go into an inside area, there's like a loading zone on the door. Like, you don't just go straight into the area, it's like you have to wait for a loading zone. It's alright. Like, there's not used a major amount of times. Like, for now, you're not really going to see it as much because we're going to be inside this part of the dungeon for pretty much the rest of the episode. So we're not going to have any, like, big loading zones. So, with this first part, this dungeon's actually in 4 parts. So, with this first part, we're actually going to play up to the dungeon item. With the second part, we're going to play through most of the second half. With the third part, we're going to get the boss key, and we're going to unlock the middle path. And with the fourth part, we're going to kill the boss. And yes, I have dedicated an entire part to the dungeon boss, that's how good of a boss it is. So I'm not sure if you noticed there, but I basically hit a switch through the wind, and you need to use the claw shot, because if you use your bow, the arrow will just go off. So you need to use the claw shot for that. And that basically turns off one of the fans, and that's important because you're not able to get through it with iron boots. Because even though iron boots can go through a wind, there is like platforms that you can fall on, so you'd be too slow to go across, so you have to turn that fan off. And there was like some vines you could claw shot onto, which I claw shotted onto, and that's because if I didn't claw shot onto them, I'd fall again, because there was another fan that you're not able to turn off, so I basically did that to skip it. Right there I just got the map. I didn't really mention it because I was talking about something else, and I just showed off the dungeon map to you just to show you how big the dungeon is. With like some of the floors, I find it a bit weird why there's basement floors, because we're right up in the sky. Like, it should just be floor 1, 2, 3, 4. I guess it's just because you start at like floor 1, so all the ones that are underneath that floor, they kind of count as basement, even though we're in the sky, and if anything we should be above the basement. We should even be above like floor 1. Like, floor 1 is just like ground level, but we're like floating in the sky. Like, there's not really any basement in the sky, I guess. So this room is pretty cool, and I really like how you have to use the boomerang again, because it's a bit of an underused item. There's a lot of items in this game that I really love that are really underused, like the boomerang for example, the spinner, Even the ball and chain is slightly underused in my opinion, and the Dominion Rod, and the slingshot. Now the slingshot is used quite well, but once you get the bow in the second dungeon, it kind of becomes useless. But the item you get in this dungeon, trust me, it is not useless, and it is the most useful item in the game. And you will understand why it's taken this long to get to it, because if you could get it really early, you could pretty much like break the game with it. So we're just gonna head this way, and we're gonna go through this door. This room is really easy to fall in, so just be careful when you're going through the room I was just in, because there's fallable platforms, there's wind going on and off, you need to wait for the wind, you need to check certain tiles. It's pretty cool. You have to look around. This room looks intimidating, but it's not. There's like 2 armored Lizalfos, and if you've seen the last dungeon, they're pretty difficult enemies. So you may be thinking fighting 2 at once is going to be really difficult and a pain, but all you need to do is jump in the middle, and when they both land near you, just spin attack. And both of them should fall down. If they don't, at least one of them should, and then you can just fight the other one or just knock him off. So it does become pretty simple. There's a switch up here, so this gate opens once you kill him, and it activates this fan here, and this shows off another new mechanic. So we were using Ukus before to fly. I'm going to need to use Ukus in this room, the next room, and the room after that. And they can actually be affected by the wind. So when there's wind going up and down, you can actually fly like up and down with Ukus. Because Ukus kind of just glide. They're like chickens. So they are basically chickens, but they just look a bit weird. So we're just going to open this cage here. And we're able to get into this cage in a minute. Now we do need to use an Uku to get in there. It is important to remember that switch, because practicing playing through this dungeon, I always forget that switch up to the right is there, the one I used the claw shot for just. So we just lift it up here. Now I'm just going to fly all the way over here so I can rechange my angle, plus I can get this chest. So I forgot what is in this chest. Oh yeah, it is a purple rupee. So it's what, 50? It's just optional. I think every chest in this room is optional. I don't think there's any like key chests or anything, so don't worry about that. I don't think there's really any, like, I think there's only 1 key in this dungeon, thinking about it. I don't think this dungeon has any other keys other than the boss key. I think they did miss a bit of potential there. They could have put in more small keys with this dungeon. I think that would have been a nice change. Like, this dungeon is far from perfect. I think any dungeon you could say is far from perfect, but this dungeon's really fun once you get to, like, the second half. And, yeah, it's not perfect. No dungeon's perfect, like I was saying, but it's just really good still. Like, even like Stone Tower Temple is my favorite dungeon of all time, and I agree there is flaws with it, but it is such a good dungeon and it's so well designed that like all the good stuff kind of outweighs it. And same with this dungeon, to be honest. This dungeon's made so well, and it's such a unique looking dungeon, and it's so much fun to play through that all the flaws kind of don't really matter that much. So we activated that switch there, and it basically activated another like wind thing. So we're able to get through this gap, and we just timed it wrong because we suck. You can just go straight into wind, by the way, so you can go like that. You can just walk into it with the Uku. I think if you try and walk into it as just Link, you kind of just get blown away from it. Like, it's a bit weird. So we're at the end of this room here. I guess this room's been teaching us about wind. It's a very clever room. And we previously saw a preview of this room, kind of. Like, the room where we got the map from. We actually saw this room from the side, but we weren't really able to access it. I didn't really show it off very well. But this room is a bit of a letdown, because it is a cool room and it is really big, but I expected something like better with this room. Because there is all this stuff to do, like that switch I just activated there, that leads back down to the map room, so it's like a shortcut back to the room with the wind, and the room that leads to like the bridge and stuff. You know the room I'm on about. So basically you have to go down to the bottom of this room because there's a door at the bottom. So I find the best way of doing it is waiting for the wind to turn off. And if you wear the iron boots while wearing the Uku, you can actually fall down quicker. I'm not sure if you know that. I'm not sure how many people know that. I don't think the game really explains to you to do that, but I think it's a really cool mechanic, and it makes a lot of sense because obviously if you're heavier, the Uku is going to struggle to carry you. So it makes rooms like this really easy because the wind doesn't really affect you and you can get down a lot quicker rather than going down the side. And we're just going to do the mini boss now. So we got to the mini boss pretty quick. The mini boss is actually like way before the halfway point in this dungeon, but I think that's good because the dungeon item is used really well, and I think this dungeon is a lot better with the dungeon item than without. Like, trust me, the second half of this dungeon is much more fun than the first half, even though the first half I have enjoyed doing. And it has shown some pretty cool mechanics. So this mini-boss is cool. It's a bit like the main boss, but he's a lot smaller. He's basically a dragon. You will see him in future as enemies. I know there is like some of these you can fight in the Cave of Ordeals, and in the Ganondorf's castle. They're like mini-boss enemies. So if you don't know what you're doing, I guess he can be quite tough, because he's got like a sword and shield and he can fly. So basically what you need to do is you need to wait for him until he's about to fly towards you, like that. And then you want to claw shot his shield, and then you just want to attack him. And a little trick you can do is when he's about to fly back up, you want to hit him with your shield. So do that thing where you like block with your shield, that hidden skill. And then he'll be weak again, and then you can attack him again. So it makes this fight twice as fast. So in this second phase here, there's 3 holes in the arena, and you basically need to watch each hole at the same time, and when he comes out of one of them you need to quickly claw shot him, because if you don't he'll fly towards you and hit you with his sword and you'll take damage. So you want to claw shot him as fast as possible and keep an eye on him, and then just do the exact same thing again. Once you've done 4 hits on him, hit him with your shield and then do 4 more hits, and he should die straight away. So that fight should take twice as long, but I think that strategy to do it is better in my opinion. And that is the end of this episode. I think the first part of this dungeon's been pretty good. I'm going to leave it here. In the next episode I will reveal the dungeon item. If you like the video, please like the video and subscribe if you're new around here. Check out the other dungeons if you haven't already, and if you're interested. And subscribe for other Twilight Princess stuff, I guess.